networking. Don't go to a networking event expecting that you're going to walk away with something. Go in with a mindset of, I'm here to enjoy myself, to have interesting conversations, to meet new people. Who knows what might come out as a result. Go in being curious and asking questions. Be interested in people. The most valuable question that I have always asked in this and many other scenarios is, who else should I speak to? Everyone's a human. You don't necessarily have to be intimidated by the fact that you see someone and you think that they're particularly senior. What's the worst that can happen if I go and try and speak to them? It's going to be maybe slightly awkward, maybe slightly embarrassing. It's not going to be the end of the world. On the other hand, what's the best that could happen? You could have a really great conversation. You could have a really great connection, and maybe something comes of that.
Hi everyone, my name is Varia and this is Shameless Careers, a podcast that helps high-achieving professionals redefine success on their own terms and build careers they truly love. As always, please give a thumbs up to this episode. It really helps the podcast reach new listeners. In today's episode, we're diving into a topic that people have a love and hate relationship with: networking. Specifically, we'll explore the most effective ways to network when you're looking to change jobs or careers. I'll be discussing this with Jeremy Cline, an executive and career coach and the host of the podcast Change Work Life. Before becoming a career coach, Jeremy spent 20 years pursuing a career in law. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here with me today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with the why. Why is it so critical to network if you want to have a successful career?
I think it first helps to dispel a myth about what networking is, which was a myth that I was under for a very long time. And that networking was about kind of getting business, winning business. So as a lawyer, we were encouraged to go to lots of networking events. And I always thought that it was, I've got to do this in order to get business. And yet business didn't kind of come in as a result of that. I'd meet lots of nice people and it was great, but it wasn't like these people were suddenly beating down my door. And then I realised that networking is about connection. So when I said I was meeting lots of people that I liked, that was what it was about. It was making connections with people. And it's a tool which helps and supports you. So when it comes to changing career, it's something very, very difficult to do by yourself in your own head. One of the most important things that anyone can do is to get out there and use networking as a tool to find out information.
What do you think are the biggest challenges that people are facing when it comes to networking?
Fear of not knowing what to say. Fear of the need to come across as an interesting person. And that's one of the reasons I like to switch it around. And yes, networking is an opportunity for you to tell people what you do and who you help and how you help them and that kind of thing. But I always focus the other way first. I always focus on the question. I go to a networking event from a place of curiosity. I want to find out, who is this person? What is it they do? What makes them tick? And also try to get outside the usual questions. So, what do you do? How long have you done it? What is your company? All that kind of stuff. Oh, yeah, okay, that's all fine. But if you find opportunities to go into other things where people genuinely want to talk about something else, like holiday plans or hobbies. I remember having a lunch with someone. They were an investment manager, and we discovered early on in the conversation that we were both quite into music. So I'm an amateur flautist. She sang in a choir, and we spent most of the conversation talking about music because it was both something that we absolutely loved. So finding that kind of connection, but first and foremost, going in with the mindset of curiosity and asking the open questions, so the who's, the what's, the when's, the how's, the why's, the questions that can't be answered with a yes/no answer. TLDR is go in being curious and asking questions. Be interested in people.
Which probably also means that you should prioritize the emotional side versus the transactional side, right?
When it's someone that you've only just met before, you've got to have that know, like, and trust. Someone needs to get to know you a bit better before they're going to send you business, unless you're very, very lucky. So it's about creating the relationships without necessarily expecting there to be this mutual exchange. I was looking for a US tax advisor, and I knew a guy who worked for an investment management company where they specialised in US clients. And so I phoned him up and said, who do you know that you can recommend? And he had one or two names. And then he said, okay, but now, who are you going to refer to me? And I was like, well, what do you need? I was actually quite taken aback that it was this very transactional. It was like, right, I've helped you, now you need to help me. That's not the way it works. You help selflessly. And one of the great things about networking, something which I will try to ask people, is who is it that they're looking to speak to? Because it may not be that they need a former lawyer or a coach. It may be that they need someone completely different. But that could be someone who's in my network. So, I don't know, maybe they need an accountant who specialises in XYZ. Maybe I know that person, so I can go, oh yeah, look, go and speak to Tom. They'll be able to help you. And that's a large part of what networking is. It's not about whether I can help you and whether you can help me, but it's who do I know who can help you that I can introduce to you.
And you've mentioned that AI can be an effective tool in order to find the right people to network with. Can you tell me more about that?
So one of the things that I found particularly helpful is using it as a research tool. I wanted to speak to people in the space just to find out more, to see whether it was a fit, and if it was, how would I get into it? And so with AI's help, I gave it some parameters, so the sorts of people, where they were based, the sorts of companies that they worked for, and then got it to go off and look for agencies, and it came back with a load of different names, none of which I'd ever heard of before. I think maybe I'd heard of one. And then I went into LinkedIn to find these people, cut and pasted some names into ChatGPT, and it said, okay, well, I would suggest starting with these two people, so email them to begin with. And so I created this list of people I could get in contact who, I think there were actually in a couple of cases one or two mutual connections. So I could say, hey Phil, I see that you're linked to Lorraine. Any chance you could introduce us? I'd really like to speak to Lorraine about something. And so you can use that as a tool to find some of the people, especially if it's in an area which is completely alien to you and you don't really have any contacts there. So that's one way that AI can be really helpful. And then when it comes to contacting these people, I found ChatGPT has actually been pretty helpful in terms of just designing an email, crafting an email. Yes, you have to edit it so it looks a little bit less like it's been something that's been written by AI. But even then, it's really helpful. And I've also used it to help coach me on some of the conversations. So say I had a conversation with someone, I put a bit about their business and I put their LinkedIn profile into ChatGPT and said, this is what I'm looking to get out of this conversation. Help me come up with some questions in order to guide the conversation. And it did. And they didn't all hit, but some of them really did. And it was able to give me like a starting point framework to have that conversation.
In terms of cold contacting, what are the tools that, obviously you have mentioned how you can reach out to someone on LinkedIn, and you have mentioned to me earlier that there are ways to find some email addresses that can be helpful for someone looking for new contacts. So can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, if it's a choice between contacting someone on LinkedIn and contacting them via email, I will always go for email because it's much more likely, I think, to get through than a random LinkedIn message.
Really? Although you can see on LinkedIn the profile of a person and can identify them a bit better.
I think they are much more likely to respond to an email than they are to a LinkedIn message, just because LinkedIn is beginning to get a little bit spammy. And so I always favour trying to see if I can find an email address first and foremost.
And how do you do it?
Well, starting point, is it on their website? If not, looking at the contact info on LinkedIn to see if it's there. If it's not there, then there are a couple of tools out there which will help you find emails. The one I use is called Hunter, so hunter.io. It's got a free tier. I think it's 25 searches a month, something like that. So you can literally put in the domain name, so from their website, and you can put in their name, and if it can find it, it will give you their email address, or it'll have a pretty good stab at it. So it will see that the typical email format is, first name dot surname at whatever it is, and it will give you, there's a very good chance that will work. It's worth saying that a lot of those emails will go unanswered because they are cold emails, but you don't need many hits. So if you identify through ChatGPT and everything, if you identify 20 or 30 people and you only get a couple of people say yes, okay, it is a little bit of a painful process to go to. But with those 2 or 3 people who say yes, you can ask them at the end of your conversation, who else should I speak to? And then that will lead to other people. It's also always worth following up. There's a podcaster I follow called Pat Flynn, who one of his expressions is the riches are in the niches, because he's American. The fortune is in the follow-up. So I always send probably at least 2 follow-up emails, maybe a week later. Hi there, just following up on my earlier email. Always worth doing, always gets results. I mean, not every time, but I always get more results sending follow-up emails than I would if I'd just sent the one email.
Imagine if you have managed to secure a contact and this person is open to go for a coffee with you. Should you position and be direct about what you're looking for and be specific? For example, if someone wants to change careers or is looking for a job, or should you present it more neutrally and, for example, position yourself not as a job seeker, but as someone who wants to find out more about the industry?
I would definitely position myself as someone who wants to find out more. And you can get quite specific about it. So you can say, right, okay, I have spent 20 years as a lawyer. This was what I did. I'm now really interested in this as an industry. How would you advise someone like me start? And if they like you, if you go in as a curious person and you ask them interesting questions, they might go, you know what? Okay, well, look, let's have another conversation.
And why do you think it's more effective versus being explicit? Because you can also argue that people like specific asks.
I think some people do like specific asks, but if you've got a random person who's effectively going, can I have a job? That I don't think is going to be terribly effective. So that, they may or may not have something, and they then may or may not be minded to give you some advice. I think going the advice route means that you will get, either way, you will get valuable feedback. And if that person is genuinely interested, and they are genuinely interested in you, and they can see some potential in you, then they will mention it if that is what they're looking for. You can't force it on them.
Right. And any other tips in terms of having impactful conversations during networking that you could share?
Knowing when to stop is probably a good one. Knowing when to end the conversation and move on. And it'll depend on what the setting is, the environment. So if it is one of these sort of one-to-one informational interviews, then be respectful of the other person's time. So if you have said, can we have a 15-minute chat, then really do try to keep it to 15 minutes. Or if you realise that you're at that mark, then say, I've just realised that we're at 15 minutes. Have you got an extra 5 minutes to talk? If you're at a networking event where there's lots of people in the room, I think knowing that everyone there wants to meet lots of different people, and so I suppose people can feel a little bit like they're being rude, extricating themselves from a conversation, whereas actually especially if the conversation has come to a natural end and you're starting to talk about the canapes or something, then it's a good time to say, well, it's been lovely speaking to you, but let's go and speak to some other people in the room.
And let's zoom into events specifically, because this is a whole different type and beast when it comes to networking. So should you optimize for quality or quantity of contacts at the networking events? And how do you know who to speak to before you go to such events?
Quality, definitely. If you are in the fortunate position that you know who is going to be there, then identifying people where you think there is likely to be mutual benefit is a good idea. I've been to plenty of events where I haven't really known who's going to be there, and you just have some conversations, and eventually you probably will speak to someone where there is that mutual connection or possibility. One mistake that I always used to make was this belief that I had to follow up with everybody, that I would get a business card and I would have to literally send everyone an email going, oh, it was lovely to meet you. My opinion on that has somewhat changed, and now I think it really is only if there's something, if you think that it's going to be mutually beneficial, if you think that you can help one another, that it really is worth following up. And maybe meeting for a coffee, meeting for another conversation, something like that, but you don't have to follow up with everyone.
And how about awkward silences and the need to do small talk, which some people can struggle with? How would you go around this challenge during in-person networking?
I suppose you've got two possibilities. One is if there's an awkward silence, and that might be the cue that it's time to go and speak to someone else. Alternatively, having some backup questions in mind, even if it's just something like, have you been on holiday this summer? Something where you can, again, create that emotional connection where you're not necessarily just talking about work.
And are there any other practical tips that you could give for in-person networking to make sure that you get to meet as many people as possible?
One great tip I was given is that you see the person who's on their own, fiddling on their mobile phone, looks like they're doing something very important, sending an email. They're not. They're just possibly a little bit shy. They're not speaking to anyone, so they're doing that instinctive thing that everyone does and getting their phone out and looking at that, and that's someone that you can approach. And if it turns out that they are quite busy, they will tell you. But more often than not, I've done this, and it's a good indicator that someone is just waiting for someone to come up and say hello.
And if there is someone who seems to be very important, how to not feel intimidated by approaching them?
It's always worth asking yourself, what do I potentially gain from this that I'm against? What do I potentially lose if it goes wrong? So like sending out cold emails. I mean, I have literally been at my keyboard with an email ready to go, and I've just felt this resistance to pressing send because I'm contacting someone. It's like the first time I'm contacting someone completely out of the blue in a particular area. It's new to me, and I'm going, don't want to do this. What if they ignore me? What if they come back and go, why are you emailing me? And then I just go, all right, what's the worst that can happen? Realistically, the worst that can happen is I get absolutely zero response. What's the best that can happen? They reply, and we have a good conversation, and maybe something comes of that. We have a good conversation. Even that would be enough. If that leads on to something else as well, even better.
And to take it even further, I have heard one approach that could be very effective is to try to reach out to someone who is above your league on a regular basis. For example, every month you block some time on Friday to do that. Exactly to your point that in the worst case, you will just get ignored. But at the best case, you get some contact that you may have never thought you can possibly get,
Yeah. There's two consequences that flow from that. One is what you talked about earlier with practice, that you exercise that muscle, you practice speaking or emailing these people, and it gets easier the more often that you do it. The other is that the kind of like the higher the barrier to entry that you feel, the fewer people are going to be doing it. So I'm pretty sure it's going back to Tim Ferriss. I think
that's
that
what I was about to say.
In the 4 Hour Work Week. Yeah, so he weren't they given the exercise of like contacting the most important person that you know, and most people didn't do that because it was too scary, and so the ones who did, because there were so few of them, they were the ones who succeeded. So yeah, I mean, you know, if you are going to email the CEO of Marks and Spencer's, then don't expect a reply necessarily, but on the other hand, there probably won't be that many people who are doing it.
And who knows, maybe CEO of Marks and Spencer's feels quite lonely.
Quite possibly.
Once you have established a good contact with someone, should you invest in maintaining this relationship? And do you have any tips on how to do it?
Things like regular events where you see the same people over and over again, that just of itself is quite a natural way to build and maintain relationships. So Christmas party season, when there's lots of drinks dues and you always end up seeing the same people over and over again because they're all invited to the same thing and everyone thinks like they've got to go to the same ones. You know, this law firm does their annual Christmas drinks and this investment house does their annual Christmas drinks, and you always see the same people. So that's a good way of building, maintaining relationships. And the other thing I think I would say is just about being intentional with it. So if there is someone that you realise you haven't been in touch with them for a while, then just going, you know, I'm just going to drop them a line and just see how they're doing, or see if they're available for a coffee. I mentioned Jordan Harbinger earlier. Something that he suggested is SMS roulette. So you go to your text messages and you scroll all the way down to the bottom and see who are the people that you just haven't contacted for ages. And you go, oh, God, yeah, no, I haven't spoken to Seb for such a long time. Tell you what, I'm going to reach out and see how they're doing, and then have a coffee, have lunch together.
Yeah, so that also people don't get an impression that you contact them only when you need something, right?
Absolutely, yeah. There's nothing wrong with contacting people where you're looking for help and advice, but if you've built up a bit of capital with them beforehand, that's helpful.
Perfect. And if there was one piece of advice that you could leave someone with who is looking to expand their network, what would this be?
Use the who do you know question. It's so effective. It's been so good for me. Ask that question when you finish the conversation. Who else should I speak to about this? Or who else do you know who can give me some advice? Or who else do you know with whom I can have a similar conversation? It's a really, really great question to ask.